The morning began with sunlight. It was the kind of clear November light that made the city appear gentler than it truly was. Along the streets of Dallas, families gathered behind thin lines of police officers. Children waved small flags, and strangers smiled at one another, as though they had all been invited to the same celebration. The air was warm for late autumn. Coats hung open, windows were raised. For a few quiet hours, the world seemed to have forgotten its dangers, and no one imagined that history was already waiting above the road. The presidential car moved slowly through the cheering crowd. Open beneath the wide Texas sky, John Fitzgerald Kennedy sat beside his wife, Jacqueline, and lifted his hand toward people he would never meet again. She wore pink, a soft and elegant color that belonged to weddings, gardens, and spring afternoons. Around them, the city pressed closer. Faces turned toward the car. People reached forward, not because they expected to touch the president, but because human beings have always wanted to stand near the symbols of their own hope. Only a few minutes earlier, the wife of the Texas governor had turned toward Kennedy and smiled. She told him that no one could say Dallas did not love him. He looked at the crowd and answered with easy warmth. No one in the car understood that the ordinary sentence would become the final thread connecting him to the living world. That is how fate often enters a life. It does not arrive with music or warning. It hides inside a simple remark, a familiar street, or a moment no one thinks to remember. Then the sound came. At first, many people believed it was a motorcycle engine, a firecracker, or some harmless noise thrown back by the buildings. But the human body recognizes danger before the mind can give it a name. Smiles disappeared. Heads turned. The president moved suddenly forward. Confusion passed through the limousine like an invisible wave. Another shot followed, and the bright afternoon was broken beyond repair. Secret Service agents began to run. The car accelerated. Behind it, the crowd remained frozen between disbelief and terror, unable to understand what their own eyes had seen. The journey to the hospital lasted only a few minutes, yet those minutes seemed to contain an entire lifetime inside the car. Jacqueline held her husband while sirens opened a path through traffic. Doctors at Parkland Memorial Hospital were waiting before the limousine stopped. They worked with the urgency of people who knew that failure would belong not only to one family, but to a nation. They opened his airway, searched for a pulse, and called for a priest. Medicine continued because medicine must continue, even when hope has already begun leaving the room. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was 46 years old. He had been president for only 1,036 days. The number seems small when placed beside the weight of what happened within it. In that brief stretch of time, he had faced the possibility of nuclear war, challenged his country to reach the moon, spoken to a divided Berlin, and begun moving his government toward the unfinished promise of civil rights. Then, on a road filled with sunlight, the clock stopped for him while the rest of the world continued. Before we travel deeper into his life, consider subscribing to the channel. These stories help us remember that history was lived by real people who felt fear, pain, love, and uncertainty, just as we do. Now, let the noise of the present day grow quieter. Imagine the streets fading, the sirens disappearing, and the calendar turning backward through wars, elections, speeches, and family photographs. To understand why Kennedy became such a powerful figure, we cannot remain in Dallas. The final moment explains only how a life ended. It does not explain how that life was formed. We must return to Boston in the early years of the 20th century. A city beautiful in stone and deeply divided in spirit. Old Protestant families occupied the highest levels of society. Their names belonged to banks, universities, law offices, and private clubs. Generations of wealth had made their position appear natural, as though influence had been placed in their hands by the weather. Beneath them lived thousands of Irish Catholic families, whose parents and grandparents had crossed the Atlantic, carrying poverty, grief and the memory of famine. The Irish found work in docks, factories, construction sites, and city offices. But work did not mean acceptance. The signs that once told them they were unwelcome slowly disappeared. Yet the judgment behind those signs survived in quieter forms. Doors remained closed. Invitations never arrived. A man could earn money, win elections, and build a respectable home, yet still be reminded that he did not belong to the old circle. This invisible barrier shaped the ambition of many Irish-American families, and few felt its pressure more intensely than the Kennedys. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, on a spring day in 1917. The house was comfortable, but not grand. A wooden home with a porch, a small garden, and the atmosphere of a family rising carefully through the world. His father, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, was still a young man, but he already carried the confidence of someone who believed that every closed door could be forced open with enough money, preparation, and he did not merely want success. He wanted his family to become impossible to ignore. Joseph moved through banking, finance, film, real estate, and politics with relentless energy. He understood risk, timing, and the private hunger that drives powerful men. Some admired him, others feared him. Even those who disliked him rarely underestimated him twice. He had grown up watching men with older names receive opportunities he believed they had not earned. Instead of accepting that world, he decided to defeat it according to its own rules. The memory of exclusion became the fuel that powered his expectations for his sons. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy possessed a different kind of strength. She was educated, disciplined, deeply religious, and capable of creating order within a household that would eventually include 9 children. She recorded illnesses, school progress, family routines, and important dates with patient attention. Her love often appeared not as softness, but as structure. Where Joseph filled the home with ambition, Rose gave it rhythm. Where he pushed the children toward the outer world, she taught them that faith, duty, and endurance would be required to survive whatever that world returned. The family dinner table became an unofficial classroom. Newspapers were read. Politics was discussed. Opinions were challenged. The children learned that it was not enough to speak. They had to defend what they believed. While their father questioned every weakness in their argument, little Jack listened carefully. He watched adults disagree without losing control. He learned how humor could soften tension, how confidence could hide uncertainty, and how attention made people feel important. Long before he understood elections, he was learning the quiet architecture of persuasion. Yet, his childhood was marked by something the public would rarely see in later years. His health was fragile. Illness returned again and again, sometimes without clear explanation. Fevers lasted too long. Pain appeared where it should not have been. Doctors offered treatments, but certainty remained distant, while other children seemed to inhabit their bodies without thought. Jack learned early that the body could become an unreliable companion. He would spend much of his life appearing strong, while privately negotiating exhaustion, discomfort, and fear. History would later preserve the image of a handsome young president standing beneath sunlight, smiling with effortless confidence. But photographs cannot show the brace beneath a shirt, the medicine taken before a meeting, or the pain hidden behind a joke. Perhaps that is why his story still feels close to us. Beneath the office, the speeches, and the legend was a person learning from childhood how to move forward while carrying what others could not see. And in time, that private struggle would shape nearly every public choice he made. Of the house where Jack Kennedy spent his earliest years did not look like the birthplace of a future president. It stood on a quiet street in Brookline, surrounded by trees, modest gardens, and families whose greatest concerns were usually the ordinary rhythms of work, school, church, and supper. If a passerby had stopped outside on a peaceful afternoon, Nothing about the home would have suggested that one of the most discussed political figures of the 20th century was sleeping in a small bedroom upstairs. History often begins in places that appear completely ordinary, until memory transforms them into landmarks. Inside the house, however, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Conversations rarely drifted toward idle gossip. Newspapers were spread across tables before breakfast had even finished. Adults discussed elections, business deals, foreign affairs, and the changing balance of power in America with remarkable seriousness. The children listened while pretending not to. Jack, especially, possessed that quiet curiosity found in certain young people who understand, long before anyone notices that adults often reveal more through casual conversation than through formal lessons. He absorbed names, ideas, and arguments without announcing that he was doing so. Joseph Kennedy believed that success was never an accident. In his mind, achievement belonged to those willing to prepare more thoroughly, work more relentlessly, and think further ahead than everyone else. He expected every child in the family to understand that the world would not hand them respect simply because they desired it. They would have to earn it repeatedly. At the dinner table, questions arrived as naturally as food. What happened in Congress today? Why did a particular country make a certain decision? What would you have done differently? There were no easy answers, and excuses were received even less warmly than mistakes. For young Jack, these evenings became an education unlike anything offered inside a classroom. He learned that confidence without knowledge quickly collapsed under pressure. He discovered that people who could explain complicated ideas simply often possessed the deepest understanding. Perhaps most importantly, he watched his father challenge opinions without attacking the people expressing them. Disagreement was not treated as hostility. It was treated as an opportunity to sharpen thought. Years later, during moments of international crisis, this habit of asking another question before accepting the obvious answer would become one of his greatest strengths. While Joseph demanded excellence, Rose created stability. Raising 9 children required extraordinary organization, yet she managed the household with calm precision rather than visible exhaustion. Every child followed routines. Education was important. Faith was important. Manners mattered. Kindness mattered just as much. She recorded illnesses, birthdays, school progress, and countless small details inside carefully kept notebooks. To outsiders, these records may have seemed unnecessary, but they reflected something deeper. She believed that attention itself was a form of love. Caring meant noticing. It meant remembering. It meant refusing to allow even the smallest part of a child's life to disappear unnoticed. Jack admired his mother. Although their relationship expressed itself quietly, she rarely overwhelmed her children with dramatic displays of affection. Instead, she offered consistency. When Joseph traveled on business, which happened frequently, she became the center holding the entire family together. Breakfast still appeared on time. Lessons continued. Church remained part of weekly life. Birthdays were celebrated. Disappointments were absorbed without complaint. Looking back, it becomes easier to understand how Jack later developed the ability to remain outwardly composed even when storms surrounded him. He had watched that example every day of his childhood. Among 9 children, competition became unavoidable. Every brother wanted to distinguish himself. Every sister searched for her own place within the lively household. Yet one figure stood slightly ahead of everyone else in the expectations of the family. Joseph Kennedy Jr., the eldest son, appeared destined to fulfill every ambition his father had imagined. Intelligent, confident, athletic, and disciplined, he seemed born to lead. Jack understood this from an early age. Unlike many younger brothers, he did not spend his childhood trying to replace the firstborn. Instead, he quietly observed, learning what admiration looked like and what pressure could do to a person expected never to fail. Being the second son offered unexpected freedom. Jack did not carry exactly the same weight of expectation during childhood, allowing parts of his personality to develop more naturally. He enjoyed reading, but also loved humor. He questioned authority when he believed authority deserved questioning. Friends remembered that he possessed an easy wit, capable of dissolving tension in almost any room. People laughed around him, not because he performed for attention, but because his observations often revealed uncomfortable truths with surprising gentleness. This ability to combine intelligence with warmth would later become one of his greatest political gifts. Yet behind the laughter remained a constant struggle, invisible to almost everyone outside the family. Illness followed Jack through much of his youth. Infections returned repeatedly. Stomach problems interrupted ordinary routines. Periods of weakness appeared without warning. Some days he possessed the energy of any healthy boy. Other days, simply attending school demanded determination. Physicians searched for explanations. But medicine during those years could not fully understand the collection of conditions affecting him. Each recovery seemed temporary before another setback arrived, leaving his parents uncertain whether the next illness would finally pass or become something permanent. Children often measure themselves against those around them, and Jack was no different. Watching stronger classmates run effortlessly across athletic fields, while his own body refused complete cooperation, could easily have produced bitterness. Surprisingly, it produced curiosity instead. He developed an unusual awareness of human limitation. At an age when most boys believed themselves almost indestructible, pain became familiar. Recovery required patience. Endurance slowly replaced certainty. Without realizing it, he was acquiring emotional habits that would later serve him during military service, political defeats, and international crises. When panic offered no useful solution, books gradually became trusted companions. During those quieter periods of recovery, history fascinated him because it revealed that even the greatest leaders had begun as uncertain young people facing ordinary fears. Biographies especially captured his imagination. He wanted to understand not merely what famous individuals accomplished, but how they thought while making difficult decisions. What separated courage from recklessness? Why did some leaders remain calm while others collapsed beneath responsibility? These questions settled quietly inside his mind, years before he possessed any reason to imagine they might someday become deeply personal. Outside the family home, Boston itself continued teaching lessons impossible to find in textbooks. The city still carried visible divisions between old wealth and new ambition. Neighborhoods reflected history. Churches reflected ancestry. Names opened certain doors, while quietly closing others. Although the Kennedys were increasingly prosperous, Joseph never allowed his children to forget that prosperity alone did not erase prejudice. He reminded them that some people would always judge their background before judging their character. The proper response, he insisted, was not resentment, but undeniable excellence. If the world questioned whether they belonged, they would answer through achievement rather than complaint. As Jack grew older, observers noticed something difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. He was not the loudest child. He was not always the strongest or healthiest. Yet people enjoyed being around him. Conversations seemed easier in his presence. Adults found themselves speaking to him longer than they intended. Classmates remembered feeling unusually understood after only brief exchanges. Perhaps it came from his habit of listening carefully before responding. Perhaps it came from living with enough physical discomfort to recognize hidden struggles in others. Whatever the reason, the quality remained with him throughout his life, quietly attracting people long before politics ever did. No one standing inside that busy household could have predicted the path waiting ahead. They could not know that the quiet boy who listened so carefully at the dinner table would someday address millions. They could not imagine that recurring childhood illnesses would become lifelong companions, hidden beneath the confident smile recognized around the world. For now, he remained simply Jack, a thoughtful young boy growing inside a family driven by extraordinary ambition, unaware that the next stage of his journey would carry him beyond the peaceful streets of Brookline and into schools where intelligence alone would not be enough to earn respect. When the time came for Jack to leave the familiar streets of Brookline and begin the next chapter of his education, he stepped into a world that demanded far more than intelligence. Schools during those years were places where character was tested as relentlessly as academic ability. Young men competed in classrooms, on athletic fields, and within the invisible social circles that often shaped confidence long before adulthood. For Jack, each new environment carried the same quiet challenge. He had to prove himself while carrying a body that never seemed willing to cooperate for very long. At Canterbury School and later at Coate, one of the country's most respected preparatory academies, discipline governed daily life. Schedules were strict, expectations were high, and teachers believed that privilege without responsibility produced weak character. Many students arrived carrying the confidence of wealthy families, assuming the future already belonged to them. Jack entered the school with a different attitude. He possessed confidence, certainly, but it was balanced by curiosity and an awareness that life rarely rewarded anyone simply because of family reputation. He understood that every new beginning erased yesterday's accomplishments. His academic record during those early years rarely suggested that he would someday become one of America's most memorable presidents. There were subjects that fascinated him deeply, and others that struggled to keep his attention. When a lesson captured his imagination, he read far beyond the assigned pages, asking questions that surprised his teachers. When it failed to do so, his mind wandered toward history, politics, literature, or whatever problem happened to occupy his thoughts that day. He was not an effortless student. Instead, he was an intensely selective learner, drawn toward ideas that felt connected to the wider world. His sense of humor also became impossible to ignore. Friends remembered that Jack possessed an ability to make people laugh without cruelty. Even when teasing classmates, there was usually warmth beneath the joke. Teachers occasionally found themselves frustrated by his playful nature. Yet they also recognized something unusual. Beneath the light-hearted exterior lived a remarkably observant young man who noticed details many others overlooked. He paid attention to expressions, pauses, and changes in mood. Long before politics entered his life, he was quietly studying people. One famous episode from his school years revealed both his mischievous spirit and the independence that would remain with him throughout adulthood. After participating in a harmless prank involving several classmates, school administrators expected apologies and embarrassment. Instead, Jack accepted responsibility with surprising calm, understanding that mistakes formed part of growing up rather than permanent definitions of character. He learned that authority deserved respect, but not blind fear. This balance between confidence and accountability would later become one of the defining features of his leadership. While school demanded energy, his health continued demanding even more. Illnesses interrupted semesters with frustrating regularity. Stomach pain returned unexpectedly. Fevers forced him into hospital beds, while classmates continued lessons without him. There were moments when it seemed impossible to predict whether he would complete the school year without another serious medical setback. Doctors prescribed rest, medication, and careful observation, but certainty remained painfully out of reach. Every recovery felt temporary, as though his body were constantly negotiating with itself over how much strength it could provide. Those long periods away from classrooms changed him in ways no examination could measure. Confined to bed, unable to participate in ordinary activities, Jack turned increasingly toward books. Reading became more than entertainment. It became travel, conversation, and education combined into one quiet experience. He explored biographies of military commanders, philosophers, explorers, and political leaders. He discovered that behind every celebrated public figure existed private uncertainty, disappointment, and sacrifice. Greatness no longer appeared mysterious. It appeared human, shaped by choices rather than destiny alone. History especially captured his imagination because it refused to offer simple heroes or simple villains. Nations rose through courage, but also through mistakes. Remarkable leaders succeeded because they adapted, questioned themselves, and sometimes admitted painful errors before correcting them. These lessons settled quietly inside the young student, who had not yet imagined himself standing before crowds or negotiating with world leaders. He was learning that wisdom often came not from certainty, but from the willingness to examine uncertainty without fear. During holidays, returning home meant stepping once again into the energetic world created by the Kennedy family. Dinner conversations had lost none of their intensity. Joseph still challenged every opinion. Current events remained the favorite subject around the table. Economic struggles, elections, changing governments overseas, and the growing instability across Europe all became topics for discussion. Jack listened with increasing confidence, occasionally surprising his father by offering thoughtful observations that reached beyond ordinary teenage conversation. He was beginning to form independent ideas instead of merely absorbing those of others. His relationship with his older brother, Joseph Jr., also continued shaping his outlook. The brothers respected one another deeply, though their personalities differed in meaningful ways. Joseph Jr. projected certainty. He seemed naturally comfortable taking command, speaking first, and embracing responsibility without hesitation. Jack admired these qualities, yet he recognized that his own strengths developed differently. He preferred listening before acting. He questioned assumptions. He examined several possibilities before reaching conclusions. Without realizing it, the two brothers were preparing for different kinds of leadership. Their father never concealed his dreams. For the eldest son, Joseph Jr., he believed, would someday enter politics and perhaps even reach the presidency. Jack understood this expectation completely. Rather than competing openly for attention, he quietly accepted his role as the younger brother whose future remained undefined. Strangely, this freedom allowed him to grow without carrying the crushing burden of fulfilling someone else's carefully designed ambition. Sometimes, the path not chosen becomes the one that prepares a person most completely for the future. Outside America, however, the world itself was beginning to change with alarming speed. Newspapers arriving each morning carried stories that seemed darker than those before them. Dictators strengthened their control across Europe. Economic hardship, unsettled governments, old alliances weakened, while new conflicts quietly formed beneath diplomatic language. For many Americans, these events still felt comfortably distant, separated by an ocean that had long appeared capable of protecting the United States from foreign turmoil. Jack was not so certain. The more he read, the more convinced he became that no nation remained isolated forever. This growing awareness encouraged him to think beyond local politics and everyday concerns. He began asking larger questions about leadership, democracy, and responsibility. What happened when free societies ignored danger until it stood at their doorstep? Why did some governments collapse, while others endured extraordinary pressure? How much responsibility did ordinary citizens carry for protecting their own freedoms? These questions would remain with him long after graduation, gradually shaping the worldview that later influenced nearly every important decision of his public career. Despite recurring illness, uneven grades, and moments of youthful rebellion, something steady had begun taking shape beneath the surface: resilience. Each setback demanded another recovery. Each disappointment required another beginning. Every missed opportunity forced him to adapt rather than surrender. Unlike many young people blessed with effortless success, Jack learned early that progress rarely followed a straight line. Advancement often came through patience, persistence, and the quiet refusal to allow temporary weakness to become permanent identity. By the time he approached the end of his preparatory education, friends and teachers still could not agree on what kind of future awaited him. Some believed he possessed exceptional intellectual promise, hidden beneath a relaxed personality. Others thought his health would prevent him from pursuing demanding ambitions. Even within his own family, attention continued, focusing primarily on his older brother. Jack himself seemed strangely unconcerned by these differing opinions. He had already discovered an important truth that would guide him for the rest of his life. The future belongs less to those who appear most prepared than to those who continue growing after everyone else believes the story has already been written. Soon, another door would open. Beyond it waited one of the world's oldest universities. Unfamiliar friendships, deeper intellectual challenges, distant journeys across Europe, and experiences that would gradually transform a thoughtful young student into a man beginning to understand both the promise and the fragility of the modern world. Harvard did not simply educate young men, it challenged them to discover who its old brick buildings carried centuries of tradition. And every lecture hall seemed filled with the echoes of students who had entered as dreamers and departed as leaders, scholars, judges, writers, and presidents. When Jack Kennedy arrived in Cambridge, he entered that long tradition carrying little more than curiosity, quiet confidence, and a body that still refused to grant him the reliable strength he wished it possessed. The university would test every part of him, including those he did not yet fully understand. College life offered freedoms unavailable during his years at preparatory school. Professors encouraged debate rather than simple obedience. Classmates arrived from every corner of the country, bringing different beliefs, different ambitions, and different ways of seeing the world. Conversations often continued long after lectures had ended. Students argued about economics over dinner, discussed literature while walking across the campus, and questioned political events unfolding thousands of kilometers away. Jack found himself drawn naturally into these discussions, less interested in winning arguments than in discovering why intelligent people could reach entirely different conclusions. Although he enjoyed the social life surrounding the university, his deepest interests increasingly centered on history and government. He spent long hours inside libraries, reading accounts of rising empires, failed republics, revolutions, and diplomatic negotiations that had changed the course of nations. He became fascinated by the invisible forces shaping history. Wars did not begin with the first shot. Economic crises did not appear overnight. Political collapse rarely happened without years of ignored warning signs. Beneath every dramatic event lay countless quiet decisions that most people had never noticed until it was too late. His academic performance gradually reflected this growing focus. Subjects connected to politics, international affairs, and history awakened an intensity that many of his earlier teachers had only glimpsed. He still possessed a playful sense of humor, still enjoyed friendships and occasional adventures away from the classroom. Yet those closest to him noticed an important change. Jack was becoming more disciplined, not because anyone demanded it, but because he had begun discovering work that genuinely interested him. Effort no longer felt like obligation, when curiosity became the driving force behind it. Outside the university walls, the world itself seemed to be changing almost every month. And across Europe, authoritarian governments expanded their influence, while democratic nations struggled to respond with confidence. Newspaper headlines grew darker. Speeches delivered by foreign leaders sounded increasingly aggressive. Ordinary citizens debated whether another global conflict could truly happen after the unimaginable suffering of the previous generation. Many hoped diplomacy would prevail. Others quietly feared that history was beginning to repeat itself with frightening precision. Jack followed these developments with unusual attention. Unlike students interested only in passing examinations, he treated world events as living lessons unfolding in real time. Maps covered his desk. Newspaper clippings accumulated inside folders. He compared different reports describing the same event, searching for contradictions and hidden motives. He slowly developed the habit that would remain with him throughout public life. Never rely upon a single source. When trying to understand a complicated problem, truth often reveals itself only after many different voices have been carefully heard. During breaks from his studies, opportunities to travel widened his understanding even further. Seeing Europe firsthand transformed distant newspaper stories into deeply human experiences. Ancient cities stood proudly beside neighborhoods still marked by economic hardship and political uncertainty. The conversations with local people revealed fears that statistics could never capture. Governments might discuss military strategy and diplomatic agreements, but ordinary families worried about keeping their children safe, protecting their homes, and preserving a future that suddenly appeared far less certain than it had only a few years earlier. These journeys quietly changed his perspective. America no longer seemed like an isolated nation, separated from foreign troubles by a vast ocean. Instead, he began viewing the world as an interconnected place where decisions made in one capital could eventually influence lives thousands of kilometers away. This broader outlook distinguished him from many young Americans of his generation, while others focused primarily on domestic concerns. Jack increasingly believed that leadership required understanding not only one's own country but also the hopes, fears, and ambitions of other nations. Yet, while his mind expanded, his body continued reminding him of its limitations. Periods of illness interrupted his studies with stubborn regularity. Severe back pain began appearing more frequently. Infections returned unexpectedly. Hospital visits became familiar rather than exceptional. There were days when simply attending lectures demanded determination that classmates never needed to consider. He rarely complained publicly. Instead, he developed the quiet habit of enduring discomfort without allowing it to dominate every conversation. Suffering, he concluded, did not become easier by speaking about it constantly. Those closest to him later recalled that illness never destroyed his sense of humor. Even after difficult medical treatments, he often found ways to make nurses laugh or reassure worried family members before speaking about his own condition. Perhaps this instinct reflected simple kindness. Perhaps it revealed something deeper. He had begun understanding that courage sometimes appears not through dramatic acts of heroism, but through the decision to protect other people from unnecessary fear. Even while carrying fears of one's own, his father continued watching carefully from a distance. Joseph Kennedy remained ambitious for every member of the family, though his greatest political expectations still rested upon the shoulders of the eldest son. Nevertheless, he recognized important changes taking place in Jack. The young man who had once appeared uncertain about his direction was developing intellectual confidence, supported by genuine knowledge rather than inherited privilege. Joseph valued achievement above almost everything else, and he respected effort wherever he found it. For perhaps the first time, he began imagining that his second son might someday accomplish more than anyone had originally expected. One assignment during his final years at Harvard would prove especially significant. Jack decided to examine why the British government had failed to respond more forcefully to the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany before the outbreak of the Second World War. Instead of accepting simple explanations, he immersed himself in diplomatic records, political debates, military realities, and public opinion. The project demanded months of careful research and disciplined writing. More importantly, it forced him to confront one of history's most painful questions. Why do intelligent governments sometimes recognize danger, yet still hesitate to act? The finished work demonstrated maturity beyond his years. Rather than blaming individuals alone, he explored the complex relationship between public opinion, economic weakness, political caution, and international uncertainty, readers recognized that the young author possessed an unusual ability to examine difficult problems without reducing them to simplistic moral judgments. Years later, after revisions, the study would be published as a book and receive considerable attention. It became one of the earliest public signs that Jack Kennedy was capable not only of speaking persuasively, but also of thinking deeply. Graduation approached against the backdrop of a world moving steadily toward war. Celebrations on campus felt quieter than they might have during more peaceful times. Many students understood that the lives they had carefully planned could soon be interrupted by events beyond anyone's control. Uncertainty settled over an entire generation. Careers could wait. Families could wait. Even personal dreams might have to wait if history demanded something greater from them. As Jack walked across the campus during those final weeks, he could not have known exactly where life would lead next. He had become a more thoughtful man than the lively student who first arrived at Harvard. Books had expanded his imagination. Travel had widened his perspective. Illness had strengthened his resilience. Research had sharpened his judgment. Yet the greatest lessons still lay ahead. Beyond the university gates waited a world descending into conflict. And before long, the young graduate who had spent years studying history would discover what it meant to live inside history itself. By the time Jack Kennedy left Harvard, the world no longer resembled the hopeful place he had entered only a few years earlier. Newspapers carried stories of cities falling beneath military occupation, governments collapsing under enormous pressure, and millions of ordinary people watching the future disappear almost overnight. The conversations that once filled university lecture halls with theories had become urgent realities. History was no longer something preserved inside books. It was unfolding hour by hour, asking every generation the same uncomfortable question: when freedom is threatened, what responsibility belongs to those fortunate enough to still possess it? For the Kennedy family, these events were followed with unusual intensity. Joseph Kennedy had been appointed ambassador to Great Britain and witnessed the growing crisis from one of Europe's most important diplomatic positions. Reports arriving from London carried a seriousness impossible to ignore. Bomb shelters became part of everyday life. Blackouts covered entire cities after sunset. Children were evacuated from their homes. Families learned to measure ordinary happiness between the distant sound of air raid sirens through letters, conversations, and official reports. Jack gained a deeper understanding of how fragile peace could truly be. His father's experiences abroad also introduced another lesson that remained with him for years. Governments often appeared stronger from the outside than they actually were. Behind polished speeches and formal ceremonies lived uncertainty, disagreement, fear, and impossible choices. Leaders rarely possessed perfect solutions. Instead, they faced decisions in which every available path carried painful consequences. This realization fascinated Jack because it transformed politics from a contest between heroes and villains into something far more human. Leadership meant carrying uncertainty without allowing uncertainty to paralyze action. As the United States slowly moved closer to entering the war, Jack found himself confronting a deeply personal conflict. His desire to serve his country grew stronger with every passing month. Yet his medical history suggested that military service might remain beyond his reach. Recurring illnesses, chronic back problems, and fragile health had followed him since childhood. Physicians questioned whether his body could withstand the demands of military training. Many young men worried about being drafted into combat. Jack worried that he might never receive the opportunity at all. Those who knew him best understood how deeply this possibility troubled him. Throughout his life, he had refused to allow physical weakness to define his identity. Every hospital stay, every painful recovery, and every disappointing medical report had strengthened rather than diminished his determination. Now, another obstacle stood before him. If the country entered war, while he remained safely at home because of poor health. He feared carrying that disappointment for the rest of his life. He wanted to prove something not only to others but also to himself. Through persistence, medical evaluations, and considerable determination, he eventually secured a position in the United States Navy. It was not achieved easily, nor was it granted simply because of his family name. And concerns about his health remained throughout the process, and many believed he would struggle under the physical demands ahead. Jack understood these doubts better than anyone else. Instead of arguing against them, he accepted that the only convincing answer would be his own performance. Once training began, military life immediately differed from everything he had previously experienced. University debates disappeared. Comfortable family routines vanished. Every day became governed by discipline, repetition, responsibility, and physical endurance. Men from different backgrounds suddenly shared the same uniforms, the same responsibilities, and the same uncertainty about what lay ahead. Wealth, education, and family reputation mattered far less than reliability. If one sailor failed, everyone around him carried the consequences. It was a lesson in equality that no classroom could fully teach. Despite recurring pain, Jack adapted surprisingly well. Fellow officers noticed that he rarely sought sympathy for his medical problems. When discomfort became severe, he endured it quietly rather than allowing it to dominate conversations. His calm personality also proved valuable. While others occasionally allowed anxiety to shape their decisions, he maintained an ability to think carefully before acting. This quiet steadiness gradually earned the respect of those serving beside him. Leadership, he was discovering, depended less upon commanding attention than upon inspiring confidence. After completing his training, he received command of a patrol torpedo boat operating in the Pacific Theater. These small, fast vessels carried limited crews and dangerous assignments. Unlike enormous battleships commanding newspaper headlines, patrol boats often worked under cover of darkness, navigating unfamiliar waters where danger could appear without warning. Every mission demanded concentration. Every night carried uncertainty. The ocean itself seemed capable of hiding both opportunity and disaster beneath its calm surface. Life aboard the vessel followed a rhythm unlike anything Jack had known before. Daylight hours brought maintenance, planning, and preparation. Engines required constant attention. Weapons demanded careful inspection. Maps were studied repeatedly because a single navigational mistake could prove fatal after sunset. When darkness arrived, the sea transformed into another world entirely. Familiar landmarks disappeared. Distant islands became black silhouettes against even darker skies. Every unusual sound forced sailors to ask whether it belonged to the wind, the waves, or an approaching enemy. These experiences quietly reshaped his understanding of responsibility. As commander, every decision affected the lives of the young men serving under him. They trusted his judgment because their survival depended upon it. The realization weighed heavily on him. Leadership no longer existed as an abstract political concept discussed inside university classrooms. It became deeply personal. Every order carried consequences, measured not in theory, but in human lives. The burden changed him. Those who later served with him often remembered that he never treated authority as personal privilege. Instead, he viewed it as an obligation, demanding careful thought before every action. During quiet moments between missions, conversations among the crew drifted toward home. Some dreamed about returning to farms, factories, or family businesses. Others spoke about wives waiting patiently, or children they had barely known before deployment. Jack listened more than he spoke. These ordinary conversations reminded him that history was not created solely by famous generals or celebrated politicians. It was carried forward by countless ordinary individuals whose names would never appear inside textbooks. Their hopes, fears, and sacrifices mattered just as deeply as those of any public figure. The endless nights across the Pacific also offered long hours for reflection. Surrounded by darkness, stretching beyond the horizon, he often considered how unexpectedly life had changed. Only a short time earlier, he had been a university student surrounded by books and lectures. Now he commanded armed sailors in waters where survival depended upon alertness and luck. In equal measure, the transformation felt almost unreal. Yet somewhere within that dramatic change, he sensed himself becoming the man he was always meant to become. Still, the greatest challenge had not yet arrived. Fate has an unusual habit of waiting until confidence feels comfortable before revealing how quickly circumstances can change. Somewhere beyond the quiet waves, another vessel was moving through the darkness. Neither crew knew that their paths were gradually drawing closer together. Within a matter of hours, a single violent collision would transform Jack Kennedy from a young naval officer into a symbol of courage, endurance, and leadership, whose story would spread far beyond the waters of the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean possessed a strange kind of silence. During the day, its endless blue waters could appear almost peaceful, stretching beyond the horizon until sea and sky merged into a single line of light. But when darkness arrived, everything changed. Familiar landmarks disappeared. Islands became invisible shadows. Every wave seemed capable of hiding danger. Sailors quickly learned that the night demanded complete attention because a single mistake, a delayed decision, or a brief moment of distraction could determine whether an entire crew would see another sunrise. Jack Kennedy and the men under his command had grown accustomed to that uneasy rhythm. Their patrol torpedo boat was small, fast, and lightly built, designed to strike quickly before disappearing back into darkness. Each mission required courage, balanced with discipline. Engines were checked repeatedly. Weapons were inspected with quiet concentration. Maps lay unfolded beneath dim lights, while officers discussed routes and possible encounters. No one pretended they controlled the sea. They merely hoped to understand it well enough to survive another night. The crew had become more than fellow sailors. Weeks of shared danger transformed strangers into something resembling family. They joked together while repairing engines beneath the burning tropical sun. They shared letters from home, photographs folded carefully inside uniform pockets, and stories about ordinary lives waiting on the other side of the war. One dreamed of opening a small business after returning home. Another spoke constantly about the daughter he had barely watched grow beyond infancy. These conversations reminded Jack that every man aboard carried a future worth protecting. Leadership inside such a small vessel felt deeply personal. Unlike commanders directing thousands of soldiers from distant headquarters, Jack knew every member of his crew by name. He understood their strengths, their habits, and even the fears they rarely admitted aloud. When he issued an order, he looked directly into the faces of the people expected to carry it out. Authority, therefore, became impossible to separate from responsibility. Every decision held the weight of real lives, rather than abstract numbers recorded inside military reports. Although recurring back pain never completely disappeared, he rarely allowed anyone to see how much discomfort he endured. Some mornings, even standing upright required determination. Rough seas often intensified the pain until every movement became an effort. Nevertheless, complaints remained private. He had long ago accepted that leadership demanded emotional steadiness. If his crew believed their commander doubted his own strength, uncertainty would spread through the boat more quickly than fear itself. Confidence, he discovered, was sometimes less about feeling fearless than about refusing to surrender to visible anxiety. During the early hours of one August night, the patrol boat moved quietly through the waters near the Solomon Islands. Visibility was poor. Darkness covered the sea so completely that distant objects vanished into blackness long before they could be identified. The engines maintained a steady rhythm, while the crew remained alert for signs of enemy movement. Nothing seemed unusual. The ocean looked calm. The air felt heavy and warm. After countless similar patrols, the night appeared almost ordinary. Then everything changed. Within seconds, without warning, an enormous Japanese destroyer emerged from the darkness. Its massive steel hull seemed to appear out of nowhere, moving with terrifying speed toward the much smaller patrol boat. There was almost no time to react. Commands were shouted across the deck. Engines struggled to change course. Sailors rushed toward their positions, but the distance between the two vessels disappeared too quickly. Before anyone fully understood what was happening, the destroyer crashed directly through the center of the patrol boat with overwhelming force. The impact shattered the wooden vessel almost instantly. The fuel ignited. Burning debris exploded across the water. Men were thrown violently into the sea. Pieces of the broken boat floated away beneath clouds of smoke, illuminated by flames. One moment, the crew had been carrying out another routine patrol. The next, they found themselves scattered across dark water, surrounded by fire, wreckage, and uncertainty. Many believed no one could possibly survive such destruction. Jack was hurled into the ocean together with the rest of his crew. The collision severely aggravated his already damaged back, leaving him in intense pain. For several moments, he struggled simply to remain conscious, while waves carried burning debris around him. Yet, as the smoke slowly drifted away, another realization replaced his own suffering. Voices called from the darkness. Some sailors answered. Others remained frighteningly silent. Instinct immediately overcame pain. Before thinking about himself, he began searching for his men. One by one, survivors gathered around the floating remains of the shattered vessel. Several were injured. Others had suffered burns. Everyone was exhausted, shocked, and uncertain whether rescue would ever come. Supplies had disappeared beneath the sea. Communication equipment was gone. Nearby enemy forces remained a constant possibility. Surrounded by open water, the group faced a reality. No training exercise could truly prepare them for survival. Would now depend not upon weapons or machinery, but upon endurance, judgment, and hope. Among those most seriously injured was a young sailor who had suffered severe burns and struggled to remain afloat. Without hesitation, Jack made a decision that later became one of the defining moments of his life. Grasping the strap of the injured man's life jacket between his teeth, he began swimming through the darkness while pulling him behind. Every stroke placed enormous strain upon his damaged back. Every wave demanded more strength than his body wished to provide. Nevertheless, he refused to release his grip. Hour after hour, they swam toward what appeared to be a distant island, barely visible against the night sky. Currents resisted every movement. Exhaustion spread through the group. Some men questioned whether they possessed enough strength to continue. Jack encouraged them quietly, never pretending the journey would be easy, only reminding them that stopping guaranteed failure, while continuing preserved at least the possibility of life. Leadership, during those endless hours, required no speeches. It required moving forward first, so that others would believe they still could. When daylight finally arrived, the survivors reached a small, uninhabited island. Relief lasted only a few moments before another reality emerged. There was almost no fresh water. Food was scarce. Rescue seemed uncertain. The island offered temporary safety from drowning, but little protection against hunger, dehydration, and isolation. Weakened by injuries and fatigue, the crew understood that survival remained far from certain. They needed someone willing to think clearly, while everyone else battled despair. Jack refused to surrender to hopelessness. Despite overwhelming exhaustion, he repeatedly swam through dangerous waters, searching for passing Allied vessels that might notice them. Each attempt demanded extraordinary physical effort from a man already suffering chronic pain and recent injuries. Often, he returned without success. Still, he tried again. Failure did not convince him to stop, because every unsuccessful search carried within it the possibility that the next attempt might finally succeed. Perseverance became their greatest remaining resource. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Hunger sharpened, thirst deepened. Yet the crew continued following their commander because he never asked them to endure anything. He refused to endure himself. Eventually, help arrived through the assistance of local islanders who courageously carried messages to Allied forces, leading to the rescue of the exhausted survivors. The ordeal had lasted only several days. Yet for those who experienced it, time seemed almost suspended between life and death. News of the remarkable escape spread quickly throughout the Navy and eventually across America. Newspapers celebrated the young officer whose determination had saved members of his crew under almost impossible circumstances. Medals recognized his courage, but those closest to Jack understood that the experience had changed him far more deeply than public recognition ever could. He had looked directly into the face of mortality, not alone, but surrounded by men whose lives had depended upon his decisions. From that moment forward, leadership would never again mean prestige or ambition alone. It would always mean accepting responsibility for human lives, even when the cost demanded every remaining ounce of strength. When Jack Kennedy finally returned from the Pacific, the crowd saw a decorated naval officer. Newspapers celebrated courage beneath impossible circumstances. Photographs captured the smile of a young man who had led his crew through one of the most remarkable survival stories of the war. Yet the man who stepped back onto American soil carried far more than medals. He returned with memories that refused to fade, physical pain that had grown even worse, and a deeper understanding of how precious ordinary life truly was. War had taken away many illusions, replacing them with quiet wisdom that no classroom could ever provide. The injuries sustained during the destruction of the patrol boat never completely healed. His back, already weakened long before military service, had suffered additional damage that would remain with him for the rest of his life. Simple movements often produced intense pain. Long periods of standing became exhausting. Many mornings began, not with confidence, but with determination, simply to rise from bed. Doctors recommended treatment after treatment, hoping to ease the discomfort. Yet no permanent solution appeared. Beneath the tailored suits that would later become familiar around the world, lived a man fighting a private battle almost every day. During recovery, Jack spent long hours reflecting upon the experience that had nearly ended his life. He thought often about the young sailors who had depended upon him in the darkness of the Pacific. He remembered exhausted faces illuminated only by moonlight, voices growing weaker after endless hours in the water, and the fragile hope that somehow refused to disappear, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. These memories never became stories told merely for entertainment. They remained deeply personal reminders that leadership carried responsibilities impossible to measure through titles or public applause. Friends noticed subtle changes in his personality after the war. The playful humor remained, but it was now balanced by greater patience and emotional depth. He listened even more carefully than before. Trivial disagreements seemed less important. People who had experienced combat often returned with a sharpened awareness that time itself could never be taken for granted. Jack shared that feeling. He understood how quickly an ordinary morning could become someone's final morning. This awareness quietly influenced the way he approached friendships, family, and eventually public service. The war had also transformed America. Millions of servicemen returned home, carrying similar hopes and invisible wounds. Families attempted to rebuild ordinary routines after years of uncertainty. Factories shifted from military production towards civilian life. Neighborhoods welcomed fathers, brothers, and sons whose lives had been forever altered by distant battlefields. The nation celebrated victory. Yet beneath the celebrations lived countless private stories of grief, sacrifice, and recovery. America itself stood at the beginning of a new chapter, whose possibilities seemed almost limitless. Within the Kennedy family, another question gradually emerged. What should Jack do next? His older brother, Joseph Jr., had long been expected to become the family's political standard-bearer. Their father had imagined him rising steadily through public office until one day reaching the presidency itself. But the war had cruelly rewritten those plans. Joseph Jr. had been killed while serving his country, leaving behind not only heartbreak, but also an enormous emptiness inside the family's future. Grief settled quietly over every conversation. No achievement could replace a lost son. For Jack, the loss carried profound emotional weight. He had admired his older brother since childhood. Although their personalities differed, their bond had remained strong. Now, suddenly, the future they once imagined together had disappeared forever. Alongside sorrow came another realization that was both painful and unavoidable. Many of the hopes once placed upon Joseph Jr. now rested upon his own shoulders. No one announced this formally. It simply became understood. The direction of the family's history had changed, and Jack now stood at the center of expectations he had never originally prepared to carry. His father recognized the transformation immediately. Joseph Kennedy remained ambitious despite personal tragedy. He believed that public service offered the family an opportunity to shape the nation's future, while honoring the sacrifice already made during the war. Yet he also understood that Jack could not simply imitate his older brother. Their strengths were different. Joseph Jr. inspired through certainty and forceful confidence. Jack possessed another gift entirely. He connected naturally with people because he listened before speaking, questioned before judging, and rarely pretended to possess answers that did not yet exist. Still, entering politics would demand far more than intelligence or family influence. It required physical stamina that his health constantly threatened to undermine. Campaigning meant endless travel, long speeches, crowded gatherings, and exhausting schedules. Many close friends quietly wondered whether his body could endure such demands. Jack himself shared those concerns. There were days when pain became almost unbearable. Medical appointments continued with discouraging regularity. Surgeries were discussed. Medications multiplied. Yet every obstacle seemed only to strengthen his determination rather than weaken it. During this period, he developed another habit that remained with him throughout life. Whenever pain forced him into bed for extended periods, he returned once again to reading. Books filled the hours that illness tried to steal. History remained his favorite companion, but he also explored economics, philosophy, literature, military strategy, and biographies of remarkable leaders. Reading was never an escape from reality. Instead, it became preparation for engaging with reality more thoughtfully. Every author offered another perspective. Every historical event revealed another lesson about human nature. Those who visited him during recovery often expected to find frustration or self-pity. Instead, they usually encountered stacks of books beside the bed, newspapers covered with handwritten notes, and conversations ranging from ancient civilizations to the newest political developments. Illness had unintentionally provided something precious, uninterrupted time for reflection. While healthier men hurried endlessly from one activity to another, Jack found himself thinking deeply about the kind of country America might become after the war, and what sort of leadership such a nation would eventually require. The more he reflected, the clearer one conviction became: democracy could never survive through speeches alone. It depended upon trust between citizens and those elected to represent them. That trust had to be earned repeatedly through honesty, competence, and courage during difficult moments. These ideas did not emerge as polished political slogans. They developed gradually through years of observation, personal suffering, military experience, and historical study. Without realizing it, he was constructing the philosophical foundation that would later define his public life. By the middle of the 1940s, Opportunities began appearing that only a few years earlier would have seemed almost unimaginable. Local political leaders encouraged him to consider seeking public office. Veterans respected his military service. Young people admired his intelligence and energy. Older voters recognized the Kennedy family name. Each conversation pointed quietly toward the same destination. Perhaps the young naval officer who had survived the Pacific possessed something America needed during this uncertain new era. Jack approached the possibility with cautious optimism, rather than blind enthusiasm. He understood that winning an election required much more than popularity. It required earning confidence from ordinary citizens whose lives differed greatly from his own. Factory workers, fishermen, teachers, nurses, shop owners, immigrants, and veterans. Each carried different concerns. If he wished to represent them honestly, he first needed to understand them. Before asking people for their votes, he intended to earn the right to ask. Soon, the decision would be made. The battlefields of the Pacific would give way to neighborhoods, town halls, church basements, and crowded streets across Massachusetts. Another journey was about to begin. One fought not with patrol boats or military maps, but with conversations, ideas, and the difficult work of convincing strangers that a young veteran still recovering from war possessed a vision worthy of their trust. It would become the first true test of the leader he had slowly been becoming since childhood. The decision to enter politics did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. There was no grand announcement, no carefully staged declaration beneath bright lights, and no certainty that success would follow. Instead, the idea grew quietly, shaped by conversations with family, trusted friends, veterans returning from war, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been transformed by years of sacrifice. America was changing rapidly. Millions of people believed the nation stood at the beginning of a new era, and they were searching for leaders capable of understanding both the victories of the past and the challenges waiting just beyond the horizon. When an opportunity opened to seek a seat in the United States House of Representatives from Massachusetts, Jack recognized that his life was approaching another turning point. He understood that military courage alone would never guarantee political success. Medals could earn admiration, but they could not replace trust. If people were going to support him, they needed to believe not only that he had served his country during war, but also that he genuinely understood their struggles during peace. Winning votes required something deeper than recognition. It required connection. The campaign began with long days and even longer evenings. Every neighborhood seemed to introduce another group of unfamiliar faces. Factories opened their doors before sunrise, allowing candidates to greet workers arriving for another demanding shift. Fishing communities worried about uncertain incomes. Young families hoped for affordable homes. Veterans searched for stable employment after returning from military service. Mothers wondered whether their children would inherit a safer world than the one they themselves had endured. Jack listened carefully because he knew that every conversation revealed another piece of the country he hoped to represent. Many people expected the son of a wealthy family to speak only about large ideas and distant policies. Instead, they found someone who seemed genuinely interested in ordinary lives. He asked questions before offering answers. He remained after meetings had officially ended, continuing conversations with people who believed their concerns were too small to matter. Years later, many voters remembered not a particular speech, but the feeling that he had truly listened. This ability did not emerge from political training. It had been developing since childhood, strengthened by illness, military service, and countless hours observing rather than dominating conversation. His natural charm certainly helped, but charm alone never carried the campaign. What distinguished him was the combination of intelligence and humility. He spoke confidently, without pretending to know everything. When confronted with difficult questions, he rarely offered simplistic promises. Instead, he acknowledged complexity while explaining how thoughtful leadership might gradually improve difficult situations. Some opponents considered this approach too cautious. Others believed voters wanted louder voices and simpler slogans. Jack trusted that honesty would ultimately leave a stronger impression than exaggerated certainty. Travel quickly became exhausting. Each morning began before sunrise and often ended well after midnight. Automobiles carried the campaign team from one town to another, while handwritten schedules filled every available hour. There were speeches inside school auditoriums, conversations in crowded restaurants, visits to veterans organizations, neighborhood gatherings, church events, and small meetings inside living rooms, where only a handful of people attended. No audience seemed too small to deserve his full attention. He approached every conversation with the same seriousness, because he believed democracy existed one voter at a time behind the public smile. However, the physical cost remained enormous, and chronic back pain accompanied him throughout the campaign. Standing for long periods often became almost unbearable. There were evenings when aides quietly helped him into automobiles, because simple movement caused intense discomfort. Doctors continued recommending rest, but campaigns rarely respected medical advice. Every day required another choice between personal comfort and public responsibility. Once again, he chose endurance. Few people watching him from the audience realized how much effort even an ordinary handshake could sometimes require. His mother watched these developments with quiet pride, mixed with understandable concern. She had witnessed years of illness, countless hospital visits, and periods when his future appeared uncertain. Now, she saw that same son willingly placing extraordinary demands upon an already fragile body. Joseph Kennedy, meanwhile, devoted tremendous energy to organizing the campaign. His experience, determination, and extensive network of relationships became valuable resources. Yet even he recognized that organization alone could not explain the growing enthusiasm surrounding his son. People responded to Jack because they sensed authenticity rather than performance. Newspapers gradually began paying closer attention to the young candidate. Reporters noticed his military record, his education, and the remarkable story of survival in the Pacific. Yet many articles also commented upon something more difficult to define. Wherever he traveled, crowds seemed unusually willing to approach him directly. Children greeted him comfortably. Older veterans shared deeply personal memories. Workers spoke candidly about financial hardship. Instead of maintaining distance, he invited conversation. These encounters created an image not of a distant political figure, but of someone who genuinely enjoyed meeting the people whose confidence he hoped to earn. His speeches also revealed an emerging philosophy that would later characterize much of his public life. Rather than dwelling entirely upon fear, he preferred speaking about possibility. America had endured depression, global war, and tremendous sacrifice. Now the nation possessed an opportunity to build something worthy of those struggles. He encouraged citizens to believe that public service remained honorable, that democracy demanded participation rather than indifference, and that every generation inherited not only rights but also responsibilities. These ideas resonated strongly with people eager to move beyond memories of conflict toward a more hopeful future. As Election Day approached, uncertainty remained. Campaigns often produce encouraging crowds while hiding private doubts. Every candidate wonders whether applause will ultimately become ballots. Jack experienced those same moments of quiet anxiety. During long evenings after public events had ended, he reviewed the day with close advisors, discussing districts still requiring attention and communities where support appeared less certain. Despite outward confidence, he understood that no amount of preparation could completely remove the unpredictability of democratic elections. Ultimately, the decision belonged not to campaign strategists, but to ordinary citizens entering polling places one by one. When the votes were finally counted, the result confirmed that the young veteran had earned the confidence of the people he sought to represent. He had won a seat in the United States House of Representatives. Celebration filled the Kennedy family home, yet beneath the happiness lived another understanding. Victory did not represent the end of a journey. It marked the beginning of a far greater responsibility. Promises spoken during campaigns would now face the difficult reality of governing. Ideals would encounter compromise. Speeches would become decisions carrying consequences for countless lives. Walking into Congress for the first time, Jack could not help remembering the path that had brought him there. The quiet streets of Brookline, endless family debates around the dinner table, hospital rooms filled with uncertainty, university libraries stacked with history books, dark waters in the Pacific, where survival had depended upon courage and trust. Each experience had quietly prepared him for this new chapter. Nothing had been wasted. Every setback, every illness, every disappointment had shaped the perspective he now carried into public office. Yet, even as he began serving in Congress, another question lingered quietly in the minds of many observers. Was this gifted young representative simply beginning a respectable political career? Or was he taking the first steps towards something far greater than anyone yet imagined? The answer remained hidden, somewhere beyond the years ahead, waiting patiently while America itself prepared to enter one of the most extraordinary decades in its history. Serving in the United States House of Representatives transformed Jack Kennedy's understanding of government in ways that no campaign ever could. Standing before enthusiastic crowds and speaking about hope had been one challenge. Participating in the slow, complicated process of creating laws proved to be another entirely. Inside the halls of Congress, every decision passed through endless discussion, negotiation, disagreement, and compromise. The distance between an inspiring idea and practical reality often appeared far greater than most citizens ever imagined. For a young representative entering Washington after the Second World War, the atmosphere felt both exciting and demanding. America had emerged from the conflict as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Industries expanded rapidly. Families moved into new suburbs. Returning veterans built businesses, attended universities, and dreamed about futures their parents had never considered possible. Yet, beneath this remarkable prosperity, new uncertainties quietly emerged. Another global struggle was beginning, not through direct military confrontation, but through political influence, ideology, intelligence operations, and the growing tension between competing superpowers. Jack understood that his generation had inherited responsibilities unlike those faced by earlier American leaders. The victory over fascism had ended one chapter, but another challenge had already begun. The world now lived beneath the shadow of nuclear weapons, where a single miscalculation could threaten millions of innocent lives. Unlike previous wars, this new conflict often unfolded through diplomacy, economic competition, scientific progress, and carefully measured political decisions rather than open battlefields. He believed America needed leaders capable of combining strength with restraint, rather than confusing the two. Inside Congress, he gained a reputation for preparing carefully before expressing opinions. While some politicians preferred speaking frequently regardless of the subject, Jack often listened first. Committee meetings became opportunities to gather information, rather than merely attract attention. Experienced lawmakers noticed that the young representative asked thoughtful questions, instead of rushing toward dramatic conclusions. He understood that appearances might influence newspapers for a day, but careful judgment could influence national policy for years. Patience, he had learned, frequently produced stronger decisions than impulse. During these years, he continued traveling extensively throughout Massachusetts. He never viewed election victories as permanent possessions. Public trust required constant renewal. Weekends often carried him back to the neighborhoods, factories, fishing towns, schools, and veterans organizations that had first welcomed him into public life. Each visit reminded him that legislation debated in Washington eventually affected ordinary families trying to build ordinary lives. If government became disconnected from those daily realities, it risked losing the very purpose for which it existed. His conversations with veterans remained especially meaningful. Having experienced war himself, he understood that many former servicemen returned carrying burdens invisible to everyone around them. Some struggled with physical injuries. Others faced emotional wounds that medical science barely understood during those years. They spoke honestly with Jack because they believed he would understand without unnecessary explanation. These encounters strengthened his conviction that governments possessed lasting obligations toward those willing to risk everything in defense of their country. Despite an increasingly demanding political schedule, his health continued deteriorating. Severe back pain returned with alarming intensity. Medical specialists recommended new treatments, specialized braces, and lengthy periods of rest that his professional responsibilities rarely allowed. There were occasions when aides wondered whether he would physically manage another day of meetings. Nevertheless, he appeared before audiences with the same calm smile many had come to recognize. Few realized that beneath carefully tailored clothing, he often wore supportive devices designed simply to help him remain standing. Hospital visits became familiar interruptions rather than unexpected events. Surgeries were discussed repeatedly. Physicians debated possible treatments while admitting that none promised complete relief. Recovery required patience, yet politics rarely paused for recovery. Whenever illness forced him away from public appearances, he returned once again to books, history, philosophy, military strategy, economics, and biographies, continued filling the quiet hours that pain attempted to claim. Reading remained his refuge, but it also became one of his greatest advantages. While political rivals hurried from event to event, Jack spent countless hours deepening the knowledge that would later distinguish his speeches from ordinary campaign rhetoric. It was also during these years that another important figure entered his life. Among the many young people moving through Washington's energetic social circles was a talented journalist and photographer named Jacqueline Bouvier. Intelligent, graceful, and remarkably well-read, she possessed curiosity, extending far beyond fashionable gatherings. She loved literature, history, art, languages, and thoughtful conversation. Unlike many people drawn toward political personalities simply because of public attention, she seemed more interested in understanding the individual behind the public image. Their early conversations revealed surprising similarities. Both enjoyed reading late into the night. Both admired history, not merely as a collection of dates, but as a living record of human choices. Both appreciated wit, delivered gently rather than loudly. Perhaps most importantly, Jacqueline recognized something hidden beneath Jack's relaxed manner. She saw a man carrying constant physical pain while refusing to allow it to define him. Compassion quietly replaced curiosity, and friendship gradually deepened into affection. Those close to them noticed how naturally they complemented one another. Jack brought warmth, humor, and easy conversation into every room. Jacqueline contributed elegance, intelligence, and quiet confidence. Neither attempted to overshadow the other. Together, they created an atmosphere that encouraged thoughtful discussion rather than unnecessary performance. Although their relationship still remained young, many sensed they shared qualities capable of sustaining something far deeper than political partnership alone. Professionally, Jack also began attracting wider national attention. Journalists observed that his speeches differed from the familiar language dominating post-war politics. He rarely relied entirely upon fear to persuade audiences. Instead, he challenged citizens to believe that democracy required participation, sacrifice, and imagination. America, he argued, should not measure greatness solely through military strength or economic success. The nation should also be judged by the quality of its ideals, the integrity of its institutions, and its willingness to defend freedom without abandoning humanity. These ideas resonated particularly strongly among younger voters. A new generation had reached adulthood after the war, carrying optimism alongside understandable anxiety about the future. They admired leaders capable of acknowledging danger without surrendering to pessimism. Jack seemed to embody that balance. His own life reflected repeated encounters with hardship, illness, and uncertainty. Yet he continued speaking about possibility rather than despair. People sensed that his optimism had been earned rather than inherited. By the beginning of the 1950s, many experienced political observers quietly reached the same conclusion. The young congressman from Massachusetts possessed ambitions extending beyond the House of Representatives. Whether he admitted it publicly mattered little. His growing influence, expanding reputation, and increasingly sophisticated understanding of national affairs suggested that another campaign would eventually follow. The question was no longer whether he belonged in public life. The question had become how far that journey might ultimately carry him. Soon, an opportunity would appear that demanded even greater courage than his first campaign. It would require confronting seasoned political opponents, enduring even harsher physical demands, and asking an entire state, rather than a single district, to place its confidence in him. The road toward the United States Senate was about to begin, and with it came the first true glimpse of the national leader. History would eventually remember the campaign for the United States Senate demanded far more than anything Jack Kennedy had previously attempted. Representing a single congressional district required energy, preparation, and determination. Asking an entire state to place its confidence in a young congressman required something much greater. Massachusetts contained bustling cities, quiet fishing villages, industrial communities, farming towns, universities, immigrant neighborhoods, and generations of families whose political loyalties had been shaped over decades. Every community carried its own concerns, traditions, and expectations. Earning their trust would require patience, measured not in days, but in countless conversations. By this stage of his career, Jack had developed a clear understanding of what separated successful public service from temporary popularity. Campaigns, built upon clever slogans, often disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Genuine relationships endured. Instead of relying entirely upon grand speeches, he preferred meeting people face to face whenever possible. He shook thousands of hands, listened to thousands of stories, and discovered once again that the greatest education available to any elected official came not from government reports, but from ordinary citizens describing their everyday lives. The schedule became relentless. Dawn often arrived before he had enjoyed more than a few hours of sleep. Breakfast meetings blended into factory visits. Factory visits gave way to neighborhood gatherings. Afternoon speeches were followed by evening fundraisers, before another long automobile journey carried the campaign toward the next town. Aides occasionally worried that even healthy candidates would struggle under such demands. Jack, however, continued carrying a body already burdened by years of chronic illness, repeated injuries, and constant pain. There were mornings when simply getting dressed became an exhausting task. Severe spasms sometimes forced him to pause before taking another step. Physicians urged caution. Close friends quietly suggested reducing the campaign schedule. Yet every interruption felt to him like an opportunity lost. He believed leadership required showing up, especially when circumstances made showing up difficult. If hard-working families rose before sunrise every day, despite their own hardships, he reasoned, then he could certainly continue despite his own discomfort. A few voters realized the extent of his physical suffering. Beneath carefully tailored clothing, he frequently wore supportive braces designed to reduce pressure on his damaged spine. Powerful medications occasionally dulled the pain enough for him to complete another day of appearances, though they often left him physically exhausted afterward. When audiences applauded his energetic speeches, almost no one recognized that moments later he might quietly lean against a wall simply to relieve the strain placed upon his back. Public confidence concealed private endurance. His relationship with Jacqueline also continued growing stronger throughout these demanding months. Although their lives were increasingly occupied by politics, interviews, public appearances, and endless travel, they still found moments to share conversations far removed from campaign strategy. They discussed novels, poetry, European history, architecture, and art, with the same enthusiasm others reserved for election results. Jack valued these discussions because they reminded him that public office represented only one part of a meaningful life. Beyond elections still existed beauty, culture, family, and the quiet pleasures that made political service worthwhile. Jacqueline also became one of the few people who truly witnessed the physical cost of his ambitions. She saw the exhaustion that followed long campaign days. She understood how often pain interrupted his sleep. Unlike newspaper photographers, who captured only confident smiles, she observed the determination required simply to maintain those smiles, rather than encouraging him to surrender his ambitions. Her support strengthened his resolve. She recognized that the desire driving him forward came not from vanity, but from a sincere belief that he still had something valuable to contribute. The political climate itself continued changing rapidly. The Cold War intensified. With every passing year, international tensions influenced domestic debates about military readiness, economic strength, scientific advancement, and the future role of America across the world. Voters increasingly searched for leaders capable of navigating these complicated realities without surrendering either confidence or caution. Jack argued that strength required wisdom as much as military power. A nation could possess enormous resources, yet still make dangerous mistakes if it failed to understand history and human nature. His speeches reflected this growing maturity. He rarely attempted to frighten audiences into supporting him. Instead, he challenged them to believe that democracy depended upon informed citizens willing to think beyond immediate fears. Freedom, he reminded listeners, demanded responsibility from both elected officials and the people choosing them. Every generation inherited unfinished work from those who came before. The question was not whether challenges would appear. The question was whether ordinary men and women possessed the courage to face those challenges together. Newspapers increasingly described him as one of the most promising younger political figures in America. Reporters commented not only upon his military record and education, but also upon his calm speaking style. Unlike politicians who dominated conversations through sheer volume, Jack often persuaded through quiet confidence. Audiences leaned forward because they sensed he respected their intelligence. He did not oversimplify difficult issues merely to create applause. Instead, he invited people to consider problems thoughtfully, trusting that honest complexity ultimately deserved greater respect than comforting illusions. Election day finally arrived. After months of exhausting effort, throughout Massachusetts, citizens entered polling places, carrying hopes shaped by family traditions, personal experiences, economic concerns, and visions for the country's future. Campaign workers waited anxiously beside telephones. As early vote counts slowly appeared, every report hinted at possible victory, while reminding everyone that final results remained uncertain. Jack himself remained outwardly composed, though those closest to him understood the emotional weight carried beneath that calm expression. As evening progressed, the pattern gradually became unmistakable. Precinct after precinct reported encouraging numbers. Support extended across communities that only months earlier had seemed difficult to reach. When victory was finally confirmed, celebration spread quickly among supporters gathered inside campaign headquarters. Applause filled the room. Friends embraced one another. Journalists hurried to record reactions from the young senator-elect, whose political future suddenly appeared brighter than ever before. Yet, amid the excitement, Jack remained characteristically measured. He thanked volunteers, campaign workers, family members, and citizens who had placed their confidence in him. Victory, he reminded those around him, represented not personal triumph, but public responsibility. Elections created opportunities rather than guarantees. Now, the difficult work truly began. The trust given freely by millions of voters would have to be honored through years of thoughtful service rather than celebrated for a single evening. Taking his seat in the United States, Senate marked another profound turning point. The chamber carried enormous historical significance. Generations of influential statesmen had debated questions determining the nation's direction within those same walls. Now, Jack joined their ranks while still remarkably young. Some older senators viewed him with cautious curiosity, uncertain whether youthful popularity would translate into effective leadership. Others recognized immediately that beneath the relaxed manner stood an unusually disciplined student of history who approached public service with genuine seriousness. Still, destiny continued, preparing challenges no election could predict. Behind every political success remained the persistent shadow of declining health. Decisions made during the coming years would test his body as severely as his judgment. At the same time, events unfolding far beyond Washington would slowly begin carrying him toward the highest office in the nation. The journey from senator to president had not yet officially begun, but history had already started arranging the moments that would make such a journey possible. By the middle of the 1950s, Jack Kennedy had become one of the most recognizable younger figures in American politics. Newspapers followed his speeches with growing interest. Political observers debated his future with increasing confidence. Colleagues who had once regarded him as an ambitious newcomer now listened more carefully whenever he spoke. Yet beneath the appearance of steady success, another battle quietly intensified. It was a struggle, fought not in public debate, but inside hospital rooms, operating theaters, and long nights of relentless physical pain. His back had troubled him for most of his life. But years of military service and the injuries suffered during the destruction of his patrol boat had transformed chronic discomfort into something far more serious. There were mornings when standing without assistance seemed almost impossible. Long sessions inside the Senate chamber became exhausting. Traveling across the country demanded physical endurance that his body could scarcely provide. Many people imagined that political life revolved around speeches and ceremonies. For Jack, every public appearance often began only after overcoming pain that would have persuaded many others to remain in bed. Eventually, physicians concluded that surgery offered the only remaining possibility for meaningful improvement. The decision carried enormous risk. Spinal operations during that era remained dangerous and unpredictable. Recovery promised to be long, painful, and uncertain. Even successful procedures could leave patients permanently weakened. Failure might end not only his political career, but also threaten his life itself. Friends urged caution. Family members struggled with anxiety. Jack understood every warning. Nevertheless, he believed that continuing without intervention might prove equally impossible. The operation became one of the most difficult moments of his life. Complications followed. Recovery progressed far more slowly than anyone had hoped. Infections appeared. Periods of intense weakness left doctors deeply concerned. There were moments when his condition became so serious that those closest to him quietly prepared themselves for the possibility that he might never fully recover. Once again, the cheerful public figure disappeared behind the closed doors of hospital rooms where determination mattered just as much as medicine. Confined to bed for extended periods, Jack returned to the habit that had sustained him through nearly every challenge since childhood. He read constantly. Books covered nearby tables, history, philosophy, political theory, military leadership, literature, and biographies filled the long hours that illness forced upon him. Unlike many patients who counted each passing day with frustration. He transformed recovery into another opportunity for intellectual growth. Pain limited his movement, but it could not limit his curiosity. If his body demanded stillness, his mind refused to remain still. During these months of recovery, another idea gradually captured his imagination. Throughout history, many political leaders had faced moments when doing what was morally right threatened their careers. Some surrendered to public pressure. Others accepted enormous personal risk rather than betray deeply held principles. Jack became fascinated by these stories because they reflected a timeless conflict between popularity and conscience. Democratic government depended upon elections, yet genuine leadership sometimes required making decisions that voters initially opposed. This growing interest eventually developed into a writing project. Unlike anything he had attempted before, he began researching senators whose courageous actions demonstrated extraordinary political integrity despite enormous personal consequences. Every chapter required careful investigation into historical records, speeches, private letters, and political circumstances. He refused to portray these individuals as flawless heroes. Instead, he explored the difficult choices confronting ordinary human beings, asked to balance ambition against conviction. The result reflected not only historical scholarship, but also his own evolving philosophy about public service. The completed work, later published as Profiles in Courage, received widespread praise. Readers admired its thoughtful examination of political character and historical responsibility. Critics recognized that the book addressed questions extending far beyond American history. Every generation, every nation, and every community eventually asks whether individuals possess the courage to defend principle when doing so becomes personally costly. The work resonated deeply because it reminded readers that democracy survives not merely through institutions, but through the moral choices of those entrusted to lead them. Its success surprised even experienced political observers. Many had expected another routine political memoir. Instead, they encountered a serious reflection upon leadership itself. The book elevated Jack's reputation beyond that of a promising senator. Increasingly, he became known as a thoughtful statesman capable of combining practical political experience with genuine intellectual depth. People who had admired his wartime courage now discovered another form of courage expressed through ideas rather than military action. While his literary reputation expanded, his personal life also entered a joyful new chapter. Jack and Jacqueline married, beginning a partnership that soon captured public imagination across America. Their wedding symbolized more than the union of two well-known families. Together they represented youth, elegance, education, optimism, and a belief that public life could still possess grace and dignity. Jacqueline adapted naturally to political responsibilities while maintaining her own love of literature, languages, art, and history. She brought warmth and cultural sophistication into every setting they entered together. Their marriage also provided emotional stability during years that remained physically demanding. Jacqueline witnessed the daily realities hidden from public view. She saw the endless medical treatments, the nights interrupted by severe pain, and the exhausting effort required simply to maintain an appearance of normal health, rather than allowing these hardships to dominate their lives. They learned to treasure quieter moments together, shared meals, evenings filled with books, conversations about history, and time spent away from political obligations became increasingly precious because neither ever assumed such moments could be taken for granted. Inside the Senate, Jack's influence continued growing steadily. He spoke more frequently on questions involving international affairs, national security, and America's role in a rapidly changing world. His wartime experiences gave unusual credibility to his arguments. Unlike those discussing military matters only from theoretical knowledge, he understood firsthand the human cost of conflict. He consistently urged strength without recklessness, preparation without unnecessary aggression, and diplomacy supported by credible resolve. This balanced perspective distinguished him from voices calling either for constant confrontation or dangerous complacency. Across the nation, another quiet conversation had begun. Journalists, party leaders, and ordinary citizens increasingly asked the same intriguing question: could this young senator someday seek the presidency? Only a decade earlier, such speculation would have seemed unrealistic. Now, it appeared entirely possible. His military heroism, intellectual reputation, growing legislative experience, and remarkable ability to inspire audiences had combined into something uncommon. America seemed to be searching for a new generation of leadership, and many wondered whether Jack Kennedy might become its most recognizable face. He rarely encouraged such speculation publicly. Whenever reporters raised the subject, he redirected attention toward the responsibilities of the Senate and the unfinished work still before him. Yet, privately, he understood that history sometimes presents opportunities unexpectedly. Preparing for those opportunities required more than ambition. It demanded knowledge, discipline, resilience, trusted advisors, and unwavering commitment to the ideals one hoped to defend. Every experience since childhood had quietly shaped those qualities within him, often through suffering rather than success. Before long, the opportunity would arrive. A presidential election, unlike any in modern American history, would challenge him to persuade an entire nation that youth could stand beside wisdom, that hope could overcome fear, and that a man who had spent much of his life battling physical weakness possessed the strength to lead one of the world's most powerful countries through one of its most dangerous eras. The presidential campaign of 1960 marked far more than another election. For many Americans, it represented a choice between two different visions of the future. The nation had entered an era defined by scientific breakthroughs, nuclear tension, rapid economic growth, and profound social change. Old assumptions were being questioned. A younger generation was beginning to ask whether yesterday's leadership could fully understand tomorrow's challenges. Into that atmosphere stepped Jack Kennedy, not simply asking for votes, but inviting an entire country to imagine what it might become. From the beginning, many critics questioned whether he was ready. At just 43 years of age, he appeared remarkably young compared with previous presidential candidates. Opponents argued that experience mattered more than energy. Others suggested that his calm confidence concealed political inexperience. Some questioned whether a man whose health had remained fragile for most of his life possessed the strength necessary to carry the enormous responsibilities of the presidency. Hidden beneath public discussion were prejudices and doubts that reached beyond politics itself. Jack understood these concerns better than anyone else. He knew that no speech could erase them overnight. Trust would have to be earned patiently, one conversation, one debate, and one appearance at a time. Rather than becoming defensive, he focused upon presenting a clear vision for the nation's future. America, he argued, stood at the threshold of extraordinary opportunity. Scientific discovery promised new frontiers. Education deserved greater investment. Economic progress should benefit ordinary families rather than only a fortunate few. Strength abroad required unity and confidence at home. Instead of dwelling upon fear, he challenged citizens to believe that the coming decade could become one of remarkable achievement. The campaign itself became one of the most demanding in American history. Thousands of miles disappeared beneath airplane wings and automobile tires. Every day introduced new audiences, unfamiliar communities, and fresh questions. Factory workers wanted economic security. Farmers worried about changing markets. Students spoke passionately about education and international peace. Veterans discussed military readiness. Parents hoped their children would inherit a safer world than the one shaped by depression and global war. Jack approached each conversation with the same belief that had guided him since his earliest campaigns. Before leading people, one must first understand them. Throughout those exhausting months, the physical pain never disappeared. Long flights, endless standing, constant travel, and countless public appearances placed enormous strain upon his injured back. There were moments when simply walking across a stage demanded tremendous determination. Powerful medication remained part of daily life, though he rarely allowed others to witness the extent of his suffering. Audiences saw only the composed candidate, speaking confidently beneath bright lights. A few recognized the discipline required merely to reach the podium. Once again, his greatest battles remained invisible. Perhaps no moment better symbolized the campaign than the historic televised debates. For the first time, millions of Americans watched presidential candidates speak directly into their homes. Appearance suddenly mattered alongside policy. Confidence became visible, rather than merely described by newspaper reporters. Standing opposite his experienced opponent, Jack appeared calm, prepared, and composed. He answered difficult questions without unnecessary anger or exaggerated certainty. Instead of attempting to dominate every exchange, he projected thoughtful confidence. Viewers sensed they were watching someone comfortable, carrying responsibility, rather than simply seeking authority. The debates revealed an important truth about leadership. People rarely follow individuals who claim perfection. They place greater trust in those demonstrating steadiness. During uncertainty, Jack never pretended that every problem possessed an easy solution. Instead, he acknowledged the seriousness of the challenges before the nation, while expressing confidence that Americans possessed the creativity and courage necessary to overcome them. Optimism, in his view, did not require ignoring danger. It required believing that free people working together could meet danger without surrendering hope. Jacqueline played a quiet but essential role throughout the campaign. Although expecting their child limited some of her public appearances, her intelligence, grace, and unwavering encouragement remained powerful sources of strength. She understood better than almost anyone the sacrifices demanded by the journey they had chosen together. Behind every successful public figure often stands someone willing to carry burdens unnoticed by history. Her calm presence provided balance during months filled with extraordinary pressure and constant scrutiny. As election day approached, uncertainty filled both campaigns. Every poll suggested a remarkably close contest. Supporters on each side believed victory remained possible. Inside campaign headquarters, advisors studied reports arriving from every region, while telephones rang continuously through the night. Despite the mounting tension, Jack maintained an outward calm that reassured those around him. He had learned long ago that anxiety rarely improved judgment. Whatever the outcome, he believed he had presented his vision honestly and respectfully before the people whose decision truly mattered. The final vote became one of the closest presidential elections in American history. Throughout the long evening, results shifted repeatedly as additional states reported their totals. No one could confidently predict the winner. Families remained awake deep into the night, listening to broadcasts that reflected the extraordinary suspense unfolding across the nation. Then, gradually, the numbers revealed their conclusion. Jack Kennedy had been elected the 35th President of the United States. Celebration erupted among supporters, but his own reaction remained measured. He understood that victory represented not personal achievement alone, but the beginning of immense responsibility. The presidency offered no opportunity for complacency. The challenges awaiting him included international crises, growing Cold War tensions, economic questions, civil rights, scientific competition, and the constant threat posed by nuclear weapons. History had entrusted him with leadership during one of humanity's most dangerous periods. There would be little time to celebrate. On a cold January day, standing before the American people, he delivered words that would echo across generations. He called upon citizens not merely to expect greatness from their government, but to contribute their own talents toward building a better nation. Public service, he reminded them, belonged to everyone willing to place the common good above personal comfort. His message reflected lessons gathered throughout an extraordinary life. From childhood illness, he had learned resilience. From books, he had gained perspective. From war, he had discovered responsibility. From politics, he had understood the fragile trust connecting leaders and citizens. Yet, destiny often reaches its greatest heights while quietly preparing its deepest sorrows. The young president entered office filled with hope, intelligence, and determination to guide America toward a brighter future. Millions believed a new generation had finally arrived. They could not know that his time would be painfully brief, nor that his life would one day become one of history's most enduring symbols of courage, possibility, and unfinished promise. Even today, decades after his voice fell silent, John Fitzgerald Kennedy continues to remind the world that greatness is rarely born from comfort. It emerges from adversity, patiently endured, curiosity, faithfully pursued, and hope courageously defended, even when the future remains uncertain. His journey was never the story of a flawless man. It was the story of a human being who refused to let illness define him, refused to let fear control him, and refused to stop believing that one life, lived with purpose and service, could inspire generations yet unborn. In that enduring legacy, perhaps the greatest lesson remains wonderfully simple. History is not shaped only by those who possess extraordinary gifts. It is shaped by those who choose, day after day, to use whatever gifts they have in service of something greater than themselves.